All right, it is 6 o'clock here on the East Coast, which means it's 3 o'clock on the West Coast, which means we're going to start. So, welcome to Blind Prog, Blind and Visually Impaired Accessibility in Final Fantasy XIV. My name is Sara Winters. My in-game name is Eos Fuyu, and I'm on Coral. And thank you for tuning in, either if you're in-game or if you're just watching on Twitch. For those of you who don't know, after the Twitch panel is over, we do have a panel room in Brynhilder Mist, Ward 6, Plot 39, I believe. Because there are more people than there is space, we will be out in the garden to finish the Q&A once that's over. So, I am going to introduce myself. So, yes, I am Eos, or Sara Winters. I am a cosplayer. I do some of my own art on the right. I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for several years. I am also legally blind. I've had this condition since birth because I have something called ocular albinism, which is a genetic disease. My great-grandmother had it, and then it sat dormant on the matrilineal side of my family for several years, and then I have it, which means both of my X chromosomes are damaged. And that means if I were to have a son that would pass along, it only falls on the X. That's why most people who are albino are male, because it is one X chromosome, one Y chromosome. The X is the only one that matters. Have some genetics. So let me talk about what this panel isn't first. And I'm going to speak to the bottom point first. Unfortunately, as you could probably tell by now, this panel is not readily deaf or hard of hearing accessible. The VOD will have subtitles, so if I am speaking too fast, if I am not clear, or if you're having trouble understanding it, please be patient. The LunarCon staff have assured me that they will help me get subtitles on the VOD later. Unfortunately, subtitling stuff live is out of my capacity to do. So that is going to be a negative here. On top of that, a lot of the panel is going to revolve around sound. So I highly recommend that you put headphones on for this experience, because we are going to be listening to a lot of spatial audio. Cool? The other two things that it is not a literary analysis of blindness in Final Fantasy XIV. We are going to be talking about mechanics and methods of actually understanding the game from an accessibility perspective. If you're interested in my literary analysis on blindness in Final Fantasy XIV, I have actually written one. It will be linked at the end of the panel. It is in that set of Twitter links that I had posted inside of the panel room. It will be mentioned at the end. This is also not a universal experience across the board. Blindness is a spectrum. Lots of people who have lots of different kinds of blindness all have different needs. I will be speaking to a lot of them, including color blindness, total blindness, and partial blindness, but even among different people have different issues. So, with that in mind, please understand that this is not universal. Things that might be easy for someone might be difficult for others, and vice versa. So what is this panel? We are going to go over the accessibility features that make it possible for blind people like myself to play Final Fantasy XIV. And also some of the issues that I have that I have seen as I've been playing. Please note, and this is going to be your first, last, and only warning, that there will be spoilers through 6.0 and the 6.1 EX trial, aka the final fight in regular 6.0. There will also be some spoilers for Aglaia, only not plot spoilers, just some mechanical spoilers. If you are not up to that point, note that major spoilers are going to include the 82 and 83 solo duties, as well as the 90 trial. Cool? Cool. So, as I reminded you before, please put on headphones. We're going to be listening to a lot of Final Fantasy XIV soundscape. I will do what I can to describe this out loud for the subtitling later, but unfortunately there is only going to be so much that I can do. The LunarCon staff may be able to help describe some of the sounds that we are hearing, but that is my warning as far as that is concerned. All right, with those caveats in mind, let us begin. So, what is blindness? As I mentioned before, blindness is a spectrum. Lots of different things can qualify as blindness. When most non-blind people hear the term blind, they usually think total blindness. Cannot see anything, no light, no color, no perspective. That is actually not true. If you are 200/20 after correction, or have a visual acuity of 15 degrees or fewer, you are considered blind, at least in the United States. I actually fall into the latter category. I can only see straight ahead. My eyesight is slightly better than 200/20. It was worse when I was a child. It actually improved over that point when I was about 10 or 11. I actually have made a YouTube video about this if you want to know more. However, my visual acuity is still below 15 degrees, so I am still legally blind. I can see color. However, my my perspective of color is quite skewed because albinism, what my disease is, my eyes take in too much light. Certain colors, like red and orange, look identical to me, whereas other colors look very neon. The entire LunarCon logo, for example, looks like very hot purple. I would not be able to distinguish that shade of purple against a much brighter shade. However, like I said, lots of different forms of blindness exist. 20/20, by the way, means that what you see from 20 feet away is what somebody with, 20/20 vision sees from 20 feet away. 200/20, by contrast, means that what I see with like the visual acuity from 200 feet from 20 feet away is what someone with 20/20 vision sees from 200 feet away, which is about half the length of a football field for American football, if I'm not mistaken. So visual clarity can also be based very greatly based on lighting. Like I said, my specific condition is albinism. The more light there is, the worse my vision gets. However, other people with visual impairments see better with more light, and low light conditions like mine will actually hinder their vision. And, oh, sorry, I'm trying to read the chat at the same time. Hey, fellow albino. And last but not least, color blindness and magenta. Color blindness is when some number of the cones in your eyes are not working. Irises contain two things, rods and cones. Rods are what allow you to see light versus dark. Cones are what allow you to perceive color. We have 3 color-based cones in our eyes: red, green, and blue. No yellow. Green plus red is what actually allows us to see yellow. This means that opposite colors, if one of those cones is broken, opposite colors don't work. The most common form of color blindness is red-green color blindness. The next one is orange-blue. The least common is purple and yellow. That usually means that you are totally colorblind. Notice that I didn't say pink there. Pink and or magenta is actually the lack of color. It is a color that humans can't see. Our brains get confused and show us pink. I have several friends who are totally colorblind, and yet they can still see pink because it is not a rod or cone issue. It is just your brain is confused. Have some pink. It's pretty wild. So let's go over the most basic parts of UI and questing first. Blind people who want to play games just to experience the story are going to be mostly dealing with these first categories, and then we're going to be going into mechanics as well as rating. So how do you read all that text if you're partially blind? There are some excellent in-game built-in configurations for adjusting text size. So here are some of my FC mates showing off exactly what my screen looks like, and how large you can get the text. That is not scaled up. That is, within the game size. It can get pretty large. And keep in mind that text, there are menu windows for battle information, as well as event information. Basically anything that's in a cutscene can appear in that text box as large as you'd like it. You can adjust the transparency as well as the colors as well. So I can have blue on black, or rather than the worried piss chat, aka the yellow yell chat, can always be changed to another color that better suits you. All the menu UI bits can also be adjusted. Again, this is what you're seeing here is not scaled up for the sake of the panel. This is how big this window is when I read it in my own game. So you can adjust up to 140% the actual UI components. You can also adjust the high resolution UI settings. Even though, as you can see, I play 1600 by 900, I have it set to a 300% 4K resolution that is meant for something much larger on my screen that just makes everything huge. Yes, it's very crunchy for a lot of people, but for me, this is what allows me to see and play everything. Because I can't see a lot of detail anyway, I don't mind that it's crunchy. I can't tell. Now, how do you read all that text if you're fully blind? I am not going to go into the forbidden toe of mods here. This is not a mod. This is something called JAWS. This is what myself and a lot of other visually impaired and blind people use to use their computers. This isn't specifically a piece of software meant for video games. This is just something that sits on your computer that will read out any text to you. And because all of the text in the game is in those text boxes, JAWS can read it. So anything that is in a text box in game that for whatever reason I cannot read, my text-to-speech can take care of that for me. So if you're wondering how fully blind people can read Final Fantasy XIV in non-voiced cutscenes, this is how. So how do you interact with stuff? Because pointing and clicking on things for me is actually very difficult. I have to tell you that the fact that this MMO is controller supported and that you can do things like target type, target automatically. I mean, this isn't a first-person shooter. You're not... Your ability to play is based on how well you can combo and react, not based on how well you can target enemies. So with that in mind, and that, I don't have to actually worry if I'm hitting the head or a specific body part like in, say, Monster Hunter, I can focus on my rotation, I can focus on my healing. I main healer, White Mage, Dark Knight, and Mechanist if I want to DPS. For me personally, melee DPSs are very difficult because of the positionals, but basically any job I can play. I just can't play melee jobs optimally. So, auto-targeting, using the controller to target NPCs, skipping over the mass of people in-game is amazing. I remember when I was doing Housing Savage, being able to click the placard without, accidentally clicking another person. Very important. Now we're going to actually get into battle. We'll start with both allies as well as ambiance. And if you haven't gotten your headphones on, now is the time because we're going to start listening to a lot of audio. All right, so the very first thing, I am going to play some audio and I want you to listen, and then I'll play the video for those of you who are not visually impaired to see and compare. I want you to listen. This is the entry to a alliance raid, specifically the Evilise ones. I wanted something later because of all the prep that various jobs and classes do. Listen and tell me in chat what jobs you can hear, because even if you're not used to listening, I'm sure that you've internalized a lot of this by now and not even realized it. Yep. So I'm reading through your chat, and you guys are right. Our warrior was our main tank. We had several astrologians setting up their cards. We also had a bunch of dancers setting up their dance partners. Sages. So you guys did an awesome job of detecting all of those pre-pull items. And you'll also notice that you could hear some footsteps, and I'll go into that in a moment. But for a dungeon, not only did you hear the warrior, but before that, you could hear the actual tank stance go on. And then that light thunk. That is a healer. Specifically, it's a white mage. And then you'll hear the 2 DPSs. Now, I knew the first one was a mech, and I was playing the red mage, but unfortunately the red mage and samurai have very similar sounds. But I at least know that that sword sound is very different from a paladin's. So I could tell, that I've got 2 DPSs with me. There's the tank stance and the tank pulling out their weapon. White mage, mechanist, and you can hear the little click at the end of the gun actually opening up. The only one that's difficult is my own, red mage. That sound is very similar on samurai and often very difficult to determine which one is which. Thankfully, the paladin sword draw and the dark knight sword draw are quite different. So, basic dungeon navigation. I'm just going to go straight to the video so you can see it with the audio. So, close or open your eyes as you wish. Oh. Ooh, that was weird. There we go. But if you're listening on headphones, you should be able to hear exactly where the people are walking around me. Not only that, but what terrain they're walking on. And that's very important to me. Now, in dungeons, with the exception of Zemail Darkhold, which it has, thankfully, that lower gap has now been removed. Dungeons you can't accidentally fall off of. Zemail was a huge pain in my rear until they removed that lower platform. But it was a nice little challenge for me. But I use the sound of people's footsteps to know roughly where people are standing around me. Yeah, and you can hear the snow. Even if your party is set to limited, the sounds are not. Although you can independently actually turn different types of sounds on and off, and I'll show that in a bit. But even though I have my party set to limited, I could still hear the holy, as well as hearing the drop, even though the giant holy explosion is no longer visible. I believe the footsteps fall under, I'll get to it, but there's different settings that you can adjust when I get to one of the AoE pages. Natural AoEs, by the way, independent of AoEs from enemies, which I'll get to when I get to the enemies section, they also have a warning. So before the AoE goes off, there's actually the drop sound for the ice first. Then when you hear the sound a second time, that's when the AoE is actually going off. So that allows me to position myself correctly. 1, get out of there, AoE releases. Here we go. So I know somebody had just mentioned that the footstep sound is too loud for them. There are ways to adjust that. I'm letting myself get targeted with everything here. We did this unsynced just so that I could spend some more time having some sounds. Yes, and I did want to mention that. Snowcloak was the first dungeon where they actually utilized a lot of these sounds. A lot of the ARR dungeons are not as visually impaired friendly. It's really starting in about, I believe, 2.2 when they start dealing with massive spatial sound. But you can see here that when I'm setting all the volume differences, now I've added the ambient sound in. And that wind is actually letting you know that you're being attacked by a dot, the cold wind, as you're moving through that area. If you hear the wind, you're experiencing a damage over time debuff. If you don't hear the wind, then that means that you are safe and not being damaged. But yes, all of those different types of sound can be independently adjusted to your liking. I play with the music on but low because there are a number of bosses where the boss is actually in time to the music. So I do need it and I do enjoy it. I turn the music off here just so that you could hear the sound effects a little bit more because I know a lot of people aren't used to dealing with that mix. Did the redesign of the ARR and MSQ necessary dungeons add in spatial sound? The answer to that is, for the ones that they've significantly redesigned, yes. Total Rock has spatial sound now. Praetorium has spatial sound, especially in the boss fights. The Ultima, quote-unquote, trial has spatial sound now. I haven't done Castrum enough to tell you. I believe it also does. But let's move on to enemies and the big bad boys. So Leviathan was the first time when things were current where they added spatial sound as a major component into fights. I can tell you, and my FC can tell you, a lot of them are in here, that I am very, very good at Leviathan, and I do not fall off the boat. And here's why. Close your eyes and listen, and tell me which quadrant is he coming up from. Front left, front right, back left, or back right. Back left, correct. In fact, Yoshi P had seen my essay. I had done a video essay on Snowcloak about 1.5 years ago, and had mentioned it in the 5.5 patch notes as a reason why the PS5 was going to have spatial audio. So I'm very, very happy. If my talks about these kinds of things, I do consulting for smaller companies, not Square Enix, but mostly indies, on accessibility for the blind and visually impaired. If my talks and anything that I give can help more blind people play video games, I am a very happy person. So here's another example of proximity sounds. And I deliberately stayed just inside of this and took the hit just for you guys. I'll play that one more time since I talked over it. So you should be able to, if you can hear and have spatial headphones on, be able to hear exactly where the lightning ends in proximity to where you are standing. There's also a whole lot of standardized audio tells. This is probably the thing that all of you who are Final Fantasy XIV players are familiar with. There's the stack marker and what it sounds like. Here's the separate marker and what it sounds like. Here's a single tank buster. There's more than one going at the same time, but it's different than a multi-tank buster. You can hear that the tone is actually different on the multi-tank buster. When I do content as a tank, it's very good and very important for me to know when that tank buster needs to be taken away or taken towards the other tank. Tank busters have not always made distinct sounds. I'm actually going to get into the difference. So they've added that tank buster sound and marker back into older content. It was added in the 5.1. It was added in the near raids, and it's been backported to a lot of older content. However, it has not been added back to everything, and it doesn't need to be, and there is a reason why. Barks. How many of you here are video game designers? You should know this term. A bark is a short phrase, usually in conjunction with an action or confirmation. And a lot of the older content, instead of using the tank buster sound, uses a bark to signify a tank buster. In those cases, that noise isn't there. The bark itself is what tells you. Here's an example. So any of you who have played Aglaya, if you've heard that phrase before, you immediately know that the sides of the arena are going to drop away. Every time he says that, that action will happen immediately thereafter. Barks are really, unfortunately, only used when they can voice act them. That's why those standardized sounds are also very important. I love how immediately everybody runs to Sloppy. Well, it sounds to me like you all need a Barks pop quiz. So I've got a couple of Barks here. Let's see who can recognize which one. You don't need to tell me what raid it's from. You don't need to tell me what fight it's from. Tell me the mechanic that's associated with this bark. Yep, that's a tank buster. It's a single tank buster. All right, number 2. Yep, this is solar fans. So this is cones to the sides, each side of Azemia. Yep. This is not the circles. These are the dual cones. All right, number 3. I'll repeat this one. Some people said they couldn't hear it. Yes, so the phrase is, it's too late to beg mercy. It is not Rauger. It's Virgarat, yes. It is the series of fast and slow-moving AoEs coming at you from one side to the other.
I call out to the skies and tremble as the brilliance of 1,000 bolts blinds mine enemies and tears their flesh asunder.
Yep, so this is the 3 Slord Slam. This is not running away. This is getting to the area, the 3 safe areas as three danger areas drop down. Yep. Three circle AoEs, 1 platform per group. That is correct. Not only that, but halfway through the bark is when he starts actually dropping the AoEs, and it's always consistent at the exact midpoint of the bark. And here's my last one.
O divine light, send us from our sins! Gaze deep into the light!
Yep, this is the raid wide. Yep, Junie got it. It was the raid wide. So, we've got about 15 minutes left. Let me take the time, now that I've talked about all the awesome stuff that Final Fantasy XIV's gotten right. Yes, that was the Final Fantasy Tactics raid. Let's talk about some of the issues. This is where I'm going to remind people that there is a major 6.0, 6.1 spoiler warning. I try to keep the plot spoilers as minimal as possible, but there is no way around it because I'm going to have to talk about some of the solo duties. Yes, the reason why I gave Thancred top billing on this section is because the stealth sections are a problem. Namely the solo duty stealth sections, but also the follow sections. And I'll discuss what those are and why they're an issue. So, the stealth sections are a problem because there is no way for you to know if a mob is not moving, exactly how far away it is, and in what direction it is looking if you're visually impaired or legally blind. Thancred's actually had a lot of movement. It was very similar to Metal Gear Solid, in which case the enemies were on a patrol. So, just like I can hear my allies walking and moving around, I can hear my enemies as well. So in those cases, that kind of stealth is actually doable. As long as I can know, and I don't use a PS5 controller, I use a Steam haptic controller, so I do get a vibration when my character runs into something solid. So I do know when I've run into, say, a series of crates or boxes that I can hide behind, that, this spot is safe, I can hear the path of the enemies, I'm good to go, that's fine. The issue is, any of the static and non-moving enemies, I don't know which way they're facing, and I don't know how close I have to be for their line of sight to trigger. When I'm playing myself, like I said, I know my job, I know my skills, I know how many enemies I can feasibly handle with myself or with my chocobo if I'm out in the field, to not die. When I'm in a solo duty, I don't have that, nor do I have really reliable ways to heal if I screw up. I was able to manage to beat the Thin Cred 82 solo duty eventually, because he is a tank. He has a decent amount of defense. He has the ability to fight back, as long as you're not engaging with too many enemies at once. They do give you that ability in the solo duty to do so. So there is a bit of wiggle room for myself to be able to handle it. But the problem is that you can't move forward unless you succeed, and you cannot, like, say, a dungeon or a trial where, you know, I can stand or stack with somebody. If somebody has a triangle marker, I can follow that. I don't have that here, so I'm on my own. Even worse are the follow quests. You know, most of them are relegated to side quests, but there are a few that are mandatory for Endwalker. Namely the one in the 84 MSQ where you have to follow Urianger and he doubles back quite a bit. Only for him to then say, I knew you were following me the whole time. So why go through that rigmarole? Why force you to go through a stealth section? I don't think that they shouldn't be in the game. I think they should be optional in the same way that Kugane Tower is optional. If you want to, you know, climb this ridiculous structure, go for it. But it shouldn't be a mandatory thing to have to continue throughout the game, considering that this is not the, you know, primary gameplay loop. Yeah. So, and I don't have this complaint about, say, the blow dart mechanic from Stormblood, because when you lock onto something with the blow dart mechanic, there is a audible, like, sound. Like, I wish I could show you, but unfortunately I can't repeat any of those. So those are doable if you can't see, because they do lock on, your controller does vibrate or click into place. But these are a problem, and these are an accessibility nightmare, and you literally cannot continue until you do them, and you cannot get assistance or help from other players, because these are solo duties. Even worse, the only time that I absolutely could not do something in game, the only time that it completely screwed me over was the 83 solo duty. In from the cold is a huge problem for a whole number of reasons. So, in from the cold thematically, I'm not going to knock it for that. It makes sense. I understand why it's there. I understand the story that it's trying to tell. I understand that it's trying to put you in a place of powerlessness. However, there are a lot of problems with it. There's no pathing, combat is penalized, healing is difficult, there is no easy way to track enemies or line of sight. Stealth is your only option. If you get into more than one fight, you are more or less dead. You're always in near darkness with low contrast. I physically could not complete this. I literally had to have someone from my FC talk me through it. And even then, it took multiple tries. It was to the point where I was literally going to have someone take over my computer and just play it for me. Yeah. There's so much wrong with this in something that is part of the main story. Again, I understand what they were trying to do, but even on very easy, this is literally impossible for someone who's visually impaired. Because if I'm targeting an enemy, I can't attack them. You're supposed to be powerless in this. There is no way to get around it save pure stealth. You have no way to defend yourself. And last but not least, a disappointing EX trial, aka Endsinger EX. I do Savage. I can play Savage. I can either listen to my allies' footsteps, or there's one or two mechanics that I cannot do, mostly the timers. I don't know if I have a short or long arrow, but I can tell what arrow I have, like in P2S. So I am mostly self-sufficient. I may just need someone to call out short or long for me. But the entire Endsinger tile has absolutely zero mechanics with an audible tell. Every single one of her mechanics requires you to be able to see. And for a game that has spent so much time making even high-level play accessible to the visually impaired by consistently adding barks and unique sound tells to make the most recent EX visual only, there is one sound that's in the game, is the sound of the comets shattering, but you have to know what color they are in order to know if you need to get towards or away from them. It's just such a huge step back, and I need to call them out on this. So, in conclusion, because I am running out of time and I only have 4 minutes left, Final Fantasy XIV is extremely accessible to the blind until it isn't. And it's when those issues happen, stealth, jump puzzles, visual-only mechanics, in areas where you cannot get assistance from other players, grinds the game to a halt and makes it impossible to complete MSQ. MSQ should be visually impaired accessible, because 99% of the time it is. And it hits that point where it's so close to being perfect that why not fix those few things that are a problem? I understand that some side quest or optional items can have things that I cannot participate in. I will never climb Kugane Tower. That's fine. I understand that. But if Kugane Tower was part of MSQ, I would have had to quit. And that's where the difference lies, is make sure that the actual main path that you want people to go through, especially considering that you're adding all of the duty support for MSQ all the way through Endwalker. They finished ARR, they're doing the patches, they're getting into Heavensward. If you're going to go through that to make it a single player experience that anyone can play, you need to make sure that anyone can actually play it. And with that, thank you for coming. I will be taking questions not inside the panel room, but outside in the garden. I do want to spend a moment giving my thanks. First, I am the director, the basically head of my FC. A bunch of my FC mates are here in the audience. Thank you. On the right, you'll see our Playframe Final Fantasy XIV channel. RFC is for Dan Floyd, who runs Playframe. It's a YouTube channel. He often grabs from RFC when he wants to do content. If you want to see that, as well as seeing a bunch of the people in the audience getting to, be on that show, check out that right QR code. On the left, one of my very good friends, who's not in the FC, helped me out cutting a lot of the audio that you heard. I did all the recording, but I'm really bad at video cutting. Kayako is a really awesome artist. QR code is there. I also want to thank Superbun, who didn't give me any credits. Superbun's in RFC, another director, also helped cutting audio. And last but not least, if you want the panel notes, if you want the panel, if you want a giveaway, if you want some resources, Panel Notes Mega Thread, let me talk about the giveaway. So, I am a cosplayer, as I mentioned. I like making stuff. I have made a bunch of really awesome Final Fantasy XIV raid patches. Damage down, debuffs, whatever. And, for LunarCon, I'm giving 2 sets of them away for free. One set is a like, retweet, comment. That's linked in here. The other one is for everybody who's in the panel. If you respond to that tweet with the word BARK, B-A-R-K, because the barks we talked about. One person will get a full set of those patches. I will wait until this evening, probably around 9 p.m. my time, and pull randomly from that list of people who have responded to get patches. The other set will close when LunarCon closes tomorrow. So if you want to try to win check out that QR code. I will also put a link to that Twitter mega thread in chat once I'm back in game. So with that, thank you. It is time. I gotta go. Have a wonderful LunarCon, and I will be right back in game to hang out with everybody.